This conference will now be recorded.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Google Sheets. In this class, we'll be talking about the free web-based spreadsheet program known as Google Sheets. Google Sheets is considered an equivalent to Microsoft Excel. All right, it is the same kind of program. It does the same types of things, including organizing data and applying formulas to data. Okay, of course, one of the big benefits is that this program is absolutely free. All you need to access the full version of Google Sheets, in addition to some other Google apps, is either a Gmail or Google account and an internet connection. All right, so again, it's a great alternative to Excel if you don't have access to Excel, or if you use Excel and you just want to learn about this particular program to see how they're alike and maybe different, you've come to the right place. So what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about Sheets, what it is, what it does, and then we'll get started using this program. Okay, and also before we get started, just a reminder that we have covered Google Drive in a previous class. So we won't be going into too much detail about Google Drive here. So I encourage you to check out that video on our YouTube computer instruction playlist if you need a little refresher on that. But again, any references made to Google Drive in this class, which I may refer to it a few times, but we will not be spending time in Google Drive as we did cover it in our first Google class. Okay, so just a quick note about that. And remember, you could just find that recording on our YouTube channel. So today, or tonight, I should say, we're going to basically conduct an overview of the Google Sheets screen, get acquainted with the work area and the menu options. We're going to enter data into a spreadsheet. So we're going to start building our own spreadsheet. We're going to apply formulas to our data, format our data ranges using tabs and toolbars, and I'm going to introduce notes, comments, and freezing panes. Now, if you have happened to take our Excel 2 class here through the library, the exercises in this class are identical. So we're going to be doing the exact same things we do in Excel 2, and I do that on purpose so that you can see clearly what things in Google Sheets are sort of how they operate the same to Excel, okay, how they're similar, and in some ways how they're a bit different. But what you're going to find is that on the whole, Google Sheets and Microsoft Excel work very similarly. The same tools found in similar locations, and they do the same things. So, as I mentioned, Google Sheets, it is a free web-based spreadsheet application. Okay, and all you need is, as I mentioned, a Gmail account or Google account. In our Google Drive class a couple weeks ago, we did talk about the difference. You don't need to create a Gmail account if you don't want to. You could just create a general Google account. So please review that recording if you need a refresher on how to do that. Once you have that Google account or Gmail account and you have an internet connection, you can then access Google Sheets. Now, when you're using Google Sheets, everything you do, everything you save, and everything you need to retrieve and access again is done through the Google Drive cloud. So again, we did discuss Google Drive a couple weeks ago, but remember that essentially it is that central storage area, okay, where all of your Google work is saved. So any work that you can save with a Google app, whether it's Sheets, Docs, Forms, or something else, it's going to be saved to your Google Drive. And that's where everything is being accessed from that central location, much like File Explorer in Windows, right? Where all of our folders are stored so we can get to all of our files that are saved to our actual computer. Google Drive is the same kind of thing. It's just the central area where all the stuff we create is saved and then stored in folders. Now we can create and collaborate on spreadsheets with people in real time. So one of the a big benefit to using a web-based app like this is that because we're doing it over a live internet connection, we can actually work with people in real time. Okay, kind of like if you're messaging someone over the internet, it's all in real time. Same thing here. Okay, so I can pull up a spreadsheet and work on it with somebody who's on a different computer somewhere else across the country, across the globe, and it will seem like we're working on it side by side because I can see everything they're doing, they can see everything I'm doing over the internet. And okay, so here's another thing we kind of talked about in Google Drive a couple weeks ago. We are able to very easily convert Microsoft Excel workbooks to Google Sheets and vice versa. All right, so if you have a Microsoft Excel workbook saved on your computer and you want to be able to work on it on a friend's computer or at the library, okay, some other computer somewhere else, you can upload that Excel workbook to your Google Drive account, and then from a different computer, sign into your Google Drive and then access that Excel workbook through Google Sheets, okay? And you could also, to be a bit safer, convert it to Google Sheets, which I'll remind you of how to do that a little bit later. Okay, and then vice versa. So you can also take a Google Sheet that you've created and saved. You can access it in your Google Drive and then download it to your computer and access it as a Microsoft Excel workbook. So the two file formats, Excel and Google Sheets, they are compatible. And also Google Sheets makes it very easy to revert to any prior versions of a spreadsheet. And you'll see this with other Google apps as well. So as you probably know, anytime we create some kind of file, okay, some kind of project, typically it takes several iterations. We have the initial version and then we edit it, we format it. So it goes through several different revisions or updates. So Google Sheets, like other Google apps, makes it very easy to revert to any of those earlier versions that you saved in case you need to get back to one of those. Now, in terms of creating new spreadsheets, all right, Google Sheets works just like Excel. So we can quickly add data to a new blank spreadsheet. We can copy and duplicate a sheet, all right, just like we can in Excel. So you can take an entire spreadsheet that you've created, filled with data and formulas, and copy it and save it as a new file or as a separate sheet. You can rename a spreadsheet. You can download it from the cloud, as we mentioned before, and open it in Excel. And you could use templates for various spreadsheet types. So just like Microsoft Office, Google apps like this, they come with templates as well. Okay, and just remember, kind of like in Excel, where we're able to save multiple sheets to one workbook file, Google Sheets allows us to do the same thing. Now, once we're in that sheet, creating that data set, again, we can do the same things we can with Excel. We can enter text or data into cells. We can modify the formatting of numbers, text, and cells very quickly. So if we want to change generic numbers to currency, for example, we could do that with Google Sheets just like we can with Excel. We can add, modify, or delete tabs. As I just mentioned, if you want to create more sheets within one file, you could do that here in Google Sheets. Okay, formulas and functions. Another thing that works very similarly to the way it works in Excel. We can add all values from a row or column using the sum function. So this is just one example. Remember, when we use a spreadsheet program like this, it comes with those functions. And those functions are they are built-in calculations that we can apply to any range of data. Okay, so Google Sheets essentially supports the same functions we find in Excel. Okay, so they're the same functions with the same name. And you can access the list of all Google Sheets functions online. All right, and last but not least, as kind of like we talked about in Google Drive, we can very quickly and easily share a sheet with other users in case we want to collaborate with them or we just want them to see it. Okay, so we can allow others to view, download, or edit our sheet. We can collaborate with colleagues on a project. We could send a file to a friend or client, so we could just send it to them, essentially as an email attachment. And we could share it with both Google and non-Google users. Okay, so actually for this class, for those of you attending who do not have a Gmail or Google account, I did send a link to you that will open your very own copy of a blank Google Sheet. And I was able to do that because you're able to actually share Google Sheets and other Google files with non-Google users. Now, you won't have full functionality, but you can at least create your own sheet and make edits. Now, let's just kind of very quickly review the fundamentals of using a spreadsheet program like this. Okay, and this is the same exact information I give you in our Excel classes because the same rules apply. So when we enter data into a cell, remember that data can take different forms. The first of which is text. So just like Excel, in Google Sheets, labels are very important. So text data often takes the form of labels. We use them to identify other values. The example I always use is if we have a column of individual employee ID numbers, okay, we might not know what those ID numbers are unless we have a cell in the top row that says employee ID number. So in that case, that would be an example of text data that's being used as a label to identify other data values. Of course, we can also input number data. These are typically just numbers that we're typing in ourselves into our sheet. Okay, so we might be keeping track of how many products we sold in our store, or a budget. We might be typing in the dollar amounts ourselves. All right, so that would just be numerical or number data that we're entering ourselves. Last but not least, we can also input a formula into one cell. And those formulas are taking those data values and applying some kind of calculation to them. Maybe it's adding them, maybe it's averaging them. Okay, and remember, we can incorporate text data into a mathematical formula, not just numbers. Okay, and just like Excel and Google Sheets, when we type an equation, we do not type in the numbers, okay, or we don't type in the data, I should say. We enter the cell reference where the data is stored. So when we change the numbers in any cell, the equation will be updated automatically upon the change or entry of any data that is referenced in the equation. So let's just review what all that means. All right, now this is an up close look. This is actually an Excel worksheet, but again, Google Sheets looks nearly identical. Same setup. So let's pretend we have rows 1, 2, and 3 here. And then we have columns D and E. So in this example, oops, I forgot one of my numbers. I didn't mean to do that. So in this example, this person has entered a 3 into cell E1. They've entered a 2 into cell E2. Okay, remember how we identify cells, column letter followed by row number. So this is the E1 cell, this is the E2 cell. So they've entered a 3 into this E1 cell, they've entered a 2 into the E2 cell, and in the E3 cell down here, they're entering a formula. And then they've run that formula, and it gives them their answer. So what they want to do is they want to add those two numbers, 3 and 2. But is their resulting formula going to say equals 3 plus 2? No, it's going to look like this up here. Equals E1 plus E2. So we always use the cell references where the data is stored when we build our formulas. Okay, and then the cell itself will show us the answer. And we do this, why? Because the formula will automatically update the answer if the data in cells E1 and E2 changes. So remember, your cell names, okay, the row numbers and the column letters, they do not change. Those are constants. What does often change, however, is your actual data that you're entering. Okay, so by using the cell names, we can change our data however often we need to, and the formulas we've placed, okay, the answers they produce will update automatically. So if I change this 3 to a 6, the answer down here will update instantaneously and automatically to an 8 because I'm using the cell names. Okay, and this is a Google Sheet. I just want to remind you of how we build those mathematical functions. All right, so sometimes depending on the data we're referencing or the cells we're referencing, it's preferable to use a function. And as you can see, building a function in Google Sheets is the same as building a function in Excel. We have that syntax. Okay, we always start with the equal sign for any formula, whether we're using a function or not. After the equal sign comes the function, and then our cell range in parentheses. And we'll review this again a little bit later. But I just want to show you again, it's the same syntax, the same language, if you will, as Excel. So I'm going to put that away and make my way over to Google Sheet right now. So I'm going to be using the Google Chrome web browser. So these Google apps, okay, you can typically you just run them in your web browser as they are internet-based. Now I'm going to be using Google Chrome. You do not have to use Google Chrome for Google Apps. You could use any web browser you want. Edge, Firefox, even Safari for a Mac, okay? I'm just using Google Chrome in this particular example. Now what I typically do is I go to google.com and start from here. Again, kind of like what we did with Google Drive a couple weeks ago. So the first step here would be to sign into my Google account or my Gmail account. And I would do that by going to the upper right-hand corner and clicking on the sign in button here. Okay, now remember, in the Google Drive class, I did review how to create your own Google or Gmail account by using the create account link down here. So I encourage you, if you want to review that, check out our video on our YouTube channel on our computer instruction playlist. For now, however, I'm just going to go ahead and sign into my account. Now, after I sign in, remember the sign in button turns into the first letter of your username, which just indicates that you have successfully signed in. That letter also acts as your main Google account access for various settings, okay? But we're not concerned with that one. What we are concerned with is the icon next to it, the 9 dots, and that's the gateway to all your Google apps. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And I'm going to scroll down to Google Sheets right here. All right, I'm going to be turning off my camera and microphone for 1 second, and I'll return shortly. All right, sorry for the brief pause there. All right, so right now I'm looking at my Google Sheets start screen or home screen. All right, now if you've taken Microsoft Office classes with me, the screen might look a little bit familiar because it's kind of the same thing we see with the Microsoft Office start screen. All right, we do have a template gallery. All right, remember that templates are those built-in specific types of a file. In this case, these are specific types of spreadsheets, and they allow me to create that kind of spreadsheet very quickly because they're already designed In some cases, they already have charts built in. They already have formulas built in. All I have to do is plug or erase the generic data that's there and plug in my own data. Okay, and remember, you can go to the template gallery here to get, to get more options of other templates. All right, I'm gonna click on the back button here. Now, underneath that template gallery, we have recent spreadsheets. Much like in Microsoft Office, we have recent files on the left on that start screen. So that's what we're seeing here. These are all recent spreadsheets that have created and saved in Google Sheets. All right. Now, of course, these are not technically stored in Google Sheets. These are really stored in Google Drive, because remember, that's where all your files are actually stored. Okay, but anything that's accessible in Google Sheets, anything that can be open in Google Sheets, that would be a Sheets file like this or an Excel workbook. They'll be available here, so I can get to them right from this screen. Okay, and remember, you can change your view from this grid style to a list view by clicking this icon if you prefer, like so. All right, I'm going to go back to the list view though, and you could sort them by different parameters. Right now it's sorted A to Z. I'm sorry, it's sorted last modified. You could sort it last opened. You could sort it alphabetically by title. Okay. Now, when you look at each of those file names, you will see not only the file name, but you'll see a few other things, including a little thumbnail. There we go. Sorry, my screen got away from me there. A little thumbnail of the file. You'll see when it was last modified, and you'll see the three dots, which is kind of the universal symbol for more options. So I can rename this particular sheet. I can remove it. I can open it in a different tab in my browser. Okay. Perhaps most importantly, though, and I talked about this, I believe, in Google Drive, the little icons you see there. So these two file names are nearly identical. They both say Candy Factory Data. However, on the left side, I have the Google Sheets icon. On the right side, the Microsoft Excel icon. So that tells me that this one on the left is in the Google Sheets format. The one on the right was uploaded to my Google Drive from my computer because it is an Excel workbook. Okay. And I'll remind you towards the end of class how to convert the Excel workbook to the Google Sheets format just to be safer. Okay, you don't necessarily have to do that to use it, but it's just something that I advise so that your formatting doesn't get messed up. Okay, but again, on the left side, a Google Sheets file, on the right side, an Excel workbook. But either one can be opened, accessed, edited here in Google Sheets. All right, and remember at the top of the screen, you do have your two universal Google icons, your Google account on the right, your Google Apps on the left. Over to the left, we have the Google Sheets icon. Okay, that's your home button. If at any time you want to come back to this screen here, use that button, and that will take you right here. Okay, I would avoid using the back button in your browser because you might go too far and leave Google Sheets entirely. So use the home button if you want to come back to this screen at any time. Last but not least, I shouldn't say last but not least, we have the hamburger menu here. Okay, kind of another symbol for more options. If you click on that, you'll get access to a few other popular Google apps, Docs, Slides, and Forms. You'll get access to your Google Sheets settings, which we won't really explore here because they're not very extensive. You'll see help and feedback information, and then access to your Google Drive. Okay, and in the middle there is a search tool that allows you to search for various files and not just Google Sheets. This will actually search your entire Google Drive. And then you can launch a file from that search if you need to. So what I'm going to do now is I want to create a new sheet from scratch. So you'll see that the very first template has that big plus sign. It says blank. I'm going to go ahead and click it to launch a new blank spreadsheet. Okay, so let's just talk about the screen here for a few minutes. So the screen we're looking at right now, this is a blank spreadsheet. And again, if you've used Excel, this is going to look nearly identical. Okay, the fundamentals are the same. So what we see is a grid style spreadsheet in front of us. This is, of course, where we're entering our data, potentially editing our data, and entering formulas. Okay, so we do see, let me try to, sometimes zooming in on Google Sheets over GoToMeeting can be a little bit tricky. Let me try zooming in. All right, perfect, that looks good. So we have our vertical columns identified by letter, and then our horizontal rows identified by number. All right, and where the columns and rows intersect is where we have our cell. So each of the little rectangles in that spreadsheet is a cell, and we are usually entering data into those cells. All right, so again, in terms of how we sort of enter data into the spreadsheet, how we navigate through the spreadsheet, it is the exact same as Excel. As long as a cell is selected, as I can see the A1 cell is selected right now. How do I know? Because the letter A and the number 1 are both shaded in. Also, it has a blue outline around it. So as long as that cell is selected, I could just start typing into it. And I'm just doing a quick example. You don't have to follow along with this part if you don't want to. Okay. You just type right into it. Now, when you want to go to your next cell, you could either click onto that next cell or use your keyboard. So if I want to go down to cell A2, I can click on it, or I could press the Enter key to go down a column, one cell at a time, or I could use the Tab key to go right across a row. So whatever you're more comfortable with, clicking or using your keyboard, either option is fine. Now you might be noticing one little difference between Sheets and Excel, and that's my select cursor. So notice the mouse pointer I'm waving around. In Excel, we get that white plus sign, and that's what we use to select one cell or a range of cells. In this case, it's just the regular arrow or mouse pointer in Google Sheets here, but it functions the same exact way as your select cursor in Excel. In fact, if I want to select multiple cells or a range of cells, it's the same technique, just a click, hold, and drag. Now, if I want to edit existing data in a cell, I could either overwrite the contents of the cell entirely by just typing into it as if I'm typing into it for the first time. Boom, you just overwrite it entirely. Otherwise, I can double click into the cell, get my blinking insertion point, and change it one character at a time rather than the entire data value. So again, either overwrite it entirely or double click, get inside the cell, and change it one character at a time by using your backspace or delete keys and then typing in the new data. Excuse me. Now in Google Sheets, we also have that fill handle. And in this case, it does look the same as it does in Excel. So whenever we have a cell selected or even a range of cells selected, in the bottom right-hand corner of that selection will be that little box there. Okay, or that little square. When you point at it, you get that black plus sign like this, and that's your fill handle. And remember that copies and pastes values into other cells. It also detects a series. It also copies and pastes formulas. All things we'll be covering throughout this class. So we will revisit that fill handle in just a little bit. Now on the right side of our spreadsheet, there's a vertical scroll bar to scroll up and down the sheet. And down at the bottom, there's a horizontal scroll bar to scroll left and right through the worksheet. So as I always advise, remember occasionally just be careful, make sure you're in the right place. Because if we scroll, sometimes we scroll inadvertently or we don't realize that we've scrolled, maybe we've entered a lot of data and our sheet has scrolled to the right or down or both. Okay, this happens all the time, so just be careful. If I tell you to go to the A1 cell, instinctively you're going to click in the top left corner, but that's actually the D17 cell because I scroll down, I scroll to the right. So A1 is no longer in my view. So every so often, just be careful. If you're not in the right place, just scroll accordingly to get back to where you need to be. And there's A1. Now you'll also notice that underneath of the spreadsheet here, we have our sheet tabs, much like we do in Excel. Remember, we can create more than one sheet in one file. Okay, so if we wanted to keep track of profits in one sheet, expenses in another sheet, we could do that. Have one sheet for each, but keep them saved in the same file, so we don't have to get to two files, just one. Or if you wanted to keep, you wanted to have one sheet for each month of the year, for example. So I see that a lot. That's another common use for multiple sheets. And by the way, if you want to delete data in a cell, you just select the cell itself, press delete on your keyboard, oops, and it's gone. Okay, and back down to the sheet tabs for a second. If you want to create a new sheet, there's the plus sign there, and you'll see a sheet 2. Press it again, you'll get a sheet 3, etc., etc. And just like Excel, on a PC here, if I right-click on a tab, I'll get a number of options through which I can manage that entire sheet. Okay, now we don't use a right-click too often in these classes. This is just kind of one brief example. So I do want to show you that this is available. So if I want to delete a sheet, I can click delete here. So I'll use it right now to get rid of sheet 3. Heads up, are you sure you want to delete this sheet? Okay. I'll go down to sheet 2. I can duplicate. Where I can copy to, which is similar, but the copy to allows you to put it into a new file. Okay. I can rename the tab to something more specific. I can color code my tabs. I can password protect it, just like I can in Excel. I can hide it in case I don't want other people to see it, people I send it to. Okay, and I can, if there were comments, I can view them. We'll get to comments a little bit later. And I could also relocate the tab, but it's easier to do that by just clicking and dragging. Now let me delete sheet 2 here. There we go. Now let's go above the spreadsheet and talk about the menu. So when we use some of these Google apps, Sheets, Sheets, Docs, and Slides, okay, the menu is it's set up the same way. However, this is one area where it's a bit different from Microsoft Office. All right. So in fact, let me bring up Microsoft Excel for 1 second so we can very quickly compare and contrast. Okay, so here's Microsoft Excel. And remember, when we use these Office programs, as long as they're from 2007 or later, it uses that ribbon style menu, which means that when I click on one of these tabs, insert, page layout, etc., the tools change. Okay, so that menu just turns over to something else depending on the tab I click. Now, in Google Sheets here, we're back on Google Sheets, we have kind of a more old school or classic toolbar. All right. And this is kind of similar, this toolbar. I always like to think of this as similar to the Home tab in Excel, okay? The toolbar here in Google Sheets, it has the tools that you're likely to use most often to build a simple yet effective spreadsheet, all right? Remember, when you point at these icons, they will tell you what they do, or what they are at least. Okay, and they are grouped, by the way. We do have these little lines in between, so there is some kind of logical order to the arrangement of these tools in the toolbar. You have your formatting choices for numbers, font choices. All right, cell colors and borders, alignment options for things like left, center, right alignment. Okay, and then kind of extra things, links, comments, graphs, filters. And over to the left there, I should have pointed out, you have your undo tool. your redo, a print option, and a format painter. Again, just like we do in Microsoft Office in its home tab. All right. Now, above that toolbar, you have a series of drop-down menus, and this is basically where you go for extra things that aren't in this main toolbar. Okay, now the tools that are in the toolbar, typically they're repeated in these drop-downs, but you'll also find extra tools in the drop-downs. So sometimes we have to use these to get to specific tools. File, edit, view, insert, format, data, tools, extensions, and help. All right, we'll talk about some of the icons above those drop-downs as we go through. But the last thing I want to touch on real quick is the formula bar. Okay, again, Excel has the same exact thing. Remember, the formula bar displays the contents of a cell that is selected. Okay, which is important for formulas, because remember, if I put a formula into a cell, the cell itself is going to show me the answer the formula produces. So if I forget how the formula is spelled out, or I'm trying to verify whether there's a formula there at all, the formula bar is where it will show me. All right, now real quick, we're going to start our exercises in just 1 second. We're going to start in cell A1 there. Before I do that, I just want to very quickly, someone did ask about a specific tool here. In our Excel 3 class last week, we talked about a tool called Consolidate. And it is a tool that's found in Excel's Data Tools group in its Data tab. Now, some of those data tools you'll find here in Sheets as well under its Data menu, such as Data Validation and Split Text to Columns. You'll find these in Excel. Consolidate, however, I believe it looks like it is an extension or an add-on. So you could go to your Extensions menu and go to Add-ons, go to Get Add-ons and search for it. And you should be able to find a free add-on for it. It would probably just be called the Consolidate add-on. So if you need any help locating that, you can always let me know. But yeah, sometimes with these Google apps, you need to download add-ons, which are essentially just adding extra tools to the sort of default or native program. All right, so let's all start building a spreadsheet so we can get accustomed to how Google Sheets works and get introduced to the various menu options. So I'm on cell A1, and just like in our Excel 2 class, we are pretending that we are keeping track of how many CDs or we'll just say CDs we sold in our music store. All right, specifically, we're keeping track of how many classic Broadway soundtracks, Broadway musical soundtracks we sold. Each of these soundtracks was promoted during a specific month. Okay, so we're keeping track of those, basically those promoted titles. We're keeping track of what we sold, we'll say last year in 2021. Okay, so what I want to do first is set up a column of the titles, the soundtrack titles. So we're going to be using cells A1 through A12 to fill in these 12 titles. All right, so I'm on cell A1. Let me see if I can I zoom a little bit more? Oh, good. Let's see if I can do a custom here so I can see the whole range. Try one more. I'm trying to see the whole range if I can. All right, that's better. We can work with that. Good, A1 through A12. So I'm going to start with A1 here and type in my first title, Moulin Rouge. Now to go down to cell A2, I can either click on it with my mouse pointer or just press the Enter key. Next, we have Hamilton. In cell A3, I have West Side Story. Cell A4, Chicago. Cell A5, the Music Man. Cell A6, Cats. Cell A7, In the Heights. Cell A8, we will do Wicked. Cell A9, Avenue Q. Cell A10, Hairspray. A11, Funny Girl. And cell A12, Newsies. All right, now we've entered our titles in cells A1 through A12. Remember, we would call this the A1 through A12 range. And if we were to type it in, it would be A1 colon A12. Now, the first thing I want to do, we want to do a couple things to this. First of all, we have text data values. Now, here's an example of text data values that are kind of unique data values in their own right. They're not necessarily just labels. They're really unique data values. Now, in the real world with text data values, how do we often organize them? We tend to alphabetize them, right? Like if we were to go into the actual store to look for these, they'd be in alphabetical order. Or if we were inventorying or cataloging, we would likely put them in alphabetical order A to Z. So I want to go ahead and sort these alphabetically. All right, now the process is essentially the same as Excel. The first step, I'm going to select any cell in that range. All right, you don't need to select the whole range, and you definitely don't want to select just, you don't want to select a few cells. Just select one cell in that range. That's the safest way to do this without potentially mismatching data values. Okay, really, it wouldn't really be a problem too much because there's no other data on the sheet yet, but just as a good habit, just select one cell in that range. So I've selected cell A4. Now I'm going to go ahead and sort alphabetically. Now, in my opinion, sort should be in the main toolbar. All right, but alas, only filter is. So to get to sort, let me just see. Now, we're going to go to our data menu here because we are essentially, manipulating the data in some way, hence the data menu. Okay, if we were changing the way that the cells look, maybe filling them in with a color or something like that, we'd probably go to format. But because we're talking about the data itself, we're going to go to the data menu. And we do see sort sheet here. If you point at it, you'll see sort sheet by column A to Z, Z to A. Let's click on A to Z and sort it alphabetically. There it is. All right, now you may be wondering, you may have saw sort range as well. Sort sheet versus sort range. So sort sheet basically means that we're sorting the entire sheet by this range A1 through A12. So if I had other columns filled in, they would all be sorted by column A here, which means that any associated or related values to, let's say, Avenue Q, let's say there was a price here, information about the item itself here, whatever it might be. All those related values would be sorted along with the sorted value. So you wouldn't mismatch values. So that's what we mean by sort sheet. Sort range, however, if I was to select a subset of my data, you would see sort range, which can be a bit dangerous, so you want to be careful. In fact, does it give you a warning? I know, because it's already sorted. Because that would only sort what you've selected and leave everything else out. So that's why I tend to say select one cell only and make sure you sort sheet, not sort range. Now we still have an issue here. Cell A10 where we have the Music Man. Okay, this is technically not alphabetized correctly. Because usually when we alphabetize proper nouns like this, we don't use the or the at the beginning, right? So if the proper noun has an or the at the beginning, what we call an article, we don't alphabetize by that. Usually if you saw this in a store, it would say Music Man, comma, space, the. They'd put the at the end. So let's go ahead and change that. So this is something that, much like Excel, Google Sheets is not going to fix itself. This is a human error, so we need to fix it. So I'm going to double click into cell A10. I'm going to erase the from the beginning, move my insertion point over, add a comma, space after man, and put the here, and then just click or press your Enter or Tab keys to exit that cell. Now it's still not sorted correctly, so I'm just going to do the process over. Select one cell from the range, go up to the data menu, go to sort sheet, and select sort sheet by column A. All right, now one other thing that I've always like to remind you of. Let's just use Wicked here. Okay, if you ever run into this problem, we see the same exact problem with Excel. All right, we notice everything is sorted correctly from A2 down, except A1 has Wicked. So why is that one not sorted properly? It's because I accidentally put a space before the first character in that value. Okay, so I've seen this many times. Okay, so just if you see this, get rid of that space with your backspace or delete key, exit the cell, and then sort again. Oops. Now, after all that hard work, if this was Excel, if this is the way we usually do it with our Excel classes, we'd go ahead and save it. However, because we're using an internet or web app like this, okay, because we're using it over an internet connection to get access to it, everything is being saved automatically to your Google Drive. So the second you create a blank spreadsheet, even if you don't put any information in it, it's going to be saved as a file in your Google Drive. So remember, if you keep your eyes on this section right here at the top, any change I make, it's going to say saving, saved to drive, because it automatically saves your work, okay? Furthermore, remember that to the left of that is the little folder icon with the arrow. Okay, that's your move tool. So you can, ahead of time, if you know ahead of time what specific folder you want to save this in your Google Drive, you can select it from here. Notice how it says My Drive. Okay, last but not least, where it says Untitled Spreadsheet, you can name your file right here. There's no separate window for that. You do it right here on the actual spreadsheet itself. So I can erase Untitled Spreadsheet and maybe call this Google Sheets Practice. And I'm going to put in today's date as well, which at the moment, I'm 22, that's right. There we go. And just press enter, and that name is saved. And you can change it whenever and however and whenever you need to. Just click into it again and change it if need be. And by the way, if any of you are working on this with me or you're going to, and you don't have a Google or Gmail account, you're going to have limited functionality. So some of these menus won't, especially your file menu, you won't see the same options. Furthermore, any changes you're making, those are going to be actually being saved to my Google Drive because that's where they originated from. So eventually that file will be deleted. Not right away, don't worry, but just keep in mind by the time we get to the next Google Sheets class, that file will be gone. But if you have your own Google account, you can save your own copy and use and then practice, whenever you need to. All right, so let's continue building onto our spreadsheet. So we have our titles all set to go here. Now I also want to keep track of those months. So remember I told you that each of these titles was part of a monthly promotion. All right, and just to keep things simple, we're just going to pretend that these titles are alphabetical. They also happen to be in the same order of the months of the year. So in other words, Avenue Q was the January promotion, Cats was February, Chicago was March, etc. Okay, so I want to put those months of the year into their own column so I can keep track of that data. However, I want to put those months to the left of column A here. Now, of course, column A is the first column in the spreadsheet. So in order to put a column to the left of it, we have to insert a new column, which we can do very easily, just like we can with Excel. Okay, so up there in your menu, you will see the insert dropdown. We're inserting a new column, therefore we go to the insert dropdown. And we do see columns here. Now you'll see insert one column left, insert one column right. So you want to make sure that you are targeting that insertion by selecting one of the cells from column A, just like we do in Excel. So if I want to put a column to the left of this, I select one cell from this column, it doesn't matter what cell it is. I go to insert, I go to columns, insert one column left, and now I have a new column A, and all that data was shifted over to column B. All right, and if you're used to Excel, you might see one nice benefit here is that Sheets gives me that option of left or right. Typically in Excel, it's going to be to the left as a default. Here in Sheets, we get the option of left or right. So we have a new column A. Let's go ahead and put in our promotional months. So in cell A1, I'll type in January. Now I'm going to exit that cell, but I'm not going to type anything else just yet. All right. Remember, just like Excel, Google Sheets can predict, or it can detect a predictable pattern or series. We call this auto-filling a series. We've done this with the consecutive numbers. In this case, we're going to do it in months of the year. So let's just review the fill handle for 1 second. On its most basic level, the fill handle copies and pastes values into other cells. So for example, if I select cell B4 where it says funny girl, if I go to the bottom right-hand corner, point at that little box, I'll get my fill handle. There it is, the black plus sign. If I click and drag over to C4, it's just going to copy and paste that value into that next cell that I've selected. So that's just one thing the fill handle does. Another thing the fill handle does is detect a series or auto-fill a series. So let me get rid of that by clicking undo. Remember that left turning arrow all the way to the left of your toolbar? Now I'm going to go back to cell A1 and click on it where it says January. I'm going to go to the bottom right-hand corner, point at the little box, get my fill handle, click and drag down to cell A12, and now it fills in months of the year. All right, now we're looking at this and we're realizing we made a mistake. Well, not really a big mistake, just something kind of an oversight. Maybe we should have set up our column labels first. Okay, so in other words, column B here, where we have our titles, I should probably put a label above that first title that it tells me exactly what these are. Because these could be CDs, they could be records, they could be DVDs, could be sheet music, okay, it could be a number of things. So I want to be specific. So we had a similar problem we had before. If I want to put something above this, I need a new row 1, because that is the top row in the spreadsheet. So instead of inserting a new column, this time we're going to insert a new row. And just like before, we need to target that insertion by selecting, in this case, one of the cells in row 1. And then we could say insert above. So I'll select C1. Remember, it doesn't matter which cell it is. I go up to the insert dropdown. I go to rows this time, and I'll select insert one row above. And now we have a new row 1. And remember that little trick. Okay, Google Sheets supports this just like Excel does. If I needed to insert 3 rows above, if I select 3 rows or cells from 3 rows like this, and I go to insert, notice it says 3 rows above. So I can do that ahead of time rather than inserting them one at a time. All right, so now we have a new row 1. I'm going to go to cell A1. And just to be specific, these are months of the year, kind of self-explanatory, but they're promotional months. So I'm going to use the label promo month. Now I'm going to go over to cell B1. And in this one, I'll type in CD title. So now we know that they're CDs. Now I'm just going to go ahead while we're up here and fill in the remainder of my labels. So I'm going to be filling in the range C1 through G1. So just follow along. In C1, I'll type in quantity. Now I'm going to use the tab key to go to the right. Remember, you could also click. In cell D1, cost per CD. I'll move over to E1, where we have subtotal. F1, we have sales tax. And in G1, grand total. All right, so now what we're going to be doing is filling in some more data in cell C and D. In column C and D, but the rest of it will be filled in through the use of formulas. So let's go to cell C2, where we're keeping track of the quantity sold for each title. So in this case, in cell C2, I'll be tracking how many Avenue Qs I sold last year during the month in which was promoted. All right, so C2, I'm going to start with 11. I'm going to press enter. Cell C3 will be 12. All right, cell C4, I'll do 2 at a time. C4, 0, and then 13. Okay, now we're on cell C6, 9, and then 22. We're on cell C8, 24, and then 6. Cell C10, 11, 13. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. C12, the remaining 2 values here, 19 and then 15. All right, so I'm going to scroll up and go up to cell D2 under cost per CD. Now we're going to be entering dollar amounts. Don't worry, we won't be using dollar symbols or anything like that yet. We'll come to that later. Let's just put in the actual numbers first. All right, so again, I'll do two at a time here. And starting in cell D2, we have $9.99 and then $8.99. All right, starting in cell D4, going down, I have $14.99, $9.99. All right, I'm on cell D6, again, working my way down, $11.99, $10.99. Cell D8, $10.99, oops, $8.99. Cell D10, I have, good, $9.99, $11.99. And finally, cell D12 and D13, $10.99, $9.99. And remember, no need to save manually. Everything's being saved automatically to our Google Drive. All right, now we're in cell E2 under subtotal. So here, I want to build my data using formulas. All right, so we don't need to get out a calculator and plug in the answers. Let's let Excel do it for us. So we have our subtotal, which is going to be some combination of the quantity sold and the cost per CD, right? To give us a subtotal of what we essentially made, or I shouldn't say what we made, but what we sold them for, okay? So in this case, the mathematical operation we're using is multiplication. We're going to be multiplying the quantity by the cost per CD. So basically the values in column C by the values in column D. Now in this case, this is pretty simple, so we don't really need to use a function. So we'll just do this one manually. Okay, and this is good practice too, to do it manually. So in cell E2, I'm going to press the equal sign key. Remember, in Google Sheets, just like Excel, whenever we build a formula, the first thing we need is the equal sign key, no matter what formula it is. Now it's going to kind of autofill for you. It's kind of guessing as to what you want to put there, but let's just do it ourselves for the practice. So you can either type in cell C2 or click on cell E2, it's up to you. The next thing I need is the multiplication symbol, which is Shift 8 on the keyboard. It's just the asterisk. Or if you're using a numerical keypad, it's also, you'll find it there as well. So we have equals C2 times my next cell, which is D2. I'll click on it, I'll press enter, and there's my answer. Now Google Sheets, as you can see, also will autofill the remainder, okay? Suggested autofill, but once again, which is kind of a nice benefit here, I could click on the check mark and it will just fill it in for me. But let's just, since we are kind of getting reacquainted with how we use formulas, let's do it ourselves. So I want to apply this formula in cell E2 to the remainder of my titles. So I want to go down column E, E3 through E13. Remember, I do not have to type out that formula for each and every other row. I just use the fill handle to copy and paste the formula and apply it to my other rows of data. So by selecting cell E2, I'll go to the bottom right, point at the little box, get my fill handle. There it is. I click and drag down to cell E13, let go, and it fills it all in for me. So it just takes that formula and applies it to your other values in column C and column D. And remember, if I select any of these cells, like cell E2 here, It shows 109.89, but in my formula bar, it does show me the formula going on behind the scenes if you forget. Okay, also remember that the beauty of using the cell references is that if I need to change any of these values in column C or D, okay, let's say I go to, I'll just do a quick example. You don't have to do this. If I go to cell C2 and it changes from 11 to a something crazy like 999, if you look at cell E2, the answer will update automatically and instantly to the new answer. All right, let me just undo that. That's the beauty of using cell references. You're essentially building in your own little calculator. All right, now let's go over to column F under sales tax. Now this one's pretty simple as well, but it's a little bit different. Now our sales tax, just like in real life, it's going to be a flat percentage. It's a fixed or flat percentage of the subtotal. A flat percentage of the subtotal. So in math, whenever we use the word of in a mathematical equation, again, we're talking about multiplication. So let's say our sales tax is 7%. So I'm going to press the equal sign first. Remember, I'm on cell F2. I'll put in my sales tax first. So in this case, we're not using a cell reference. We're using an actual number, which is okay. I'll put in 7%. You don't have to convert it to a decimal. Just put in 7, and then your percentage symbol is Shift 5 on the keyboard. Now I need the multiplication symbol again, Shift 8. So equal 7% times or multiplied by E2, where that subtotal is. So remember, you can either click on E2 or type in E2. Now I press enter to run the formula. There's the answer. Now I want to apply that formula to the other rows of data. So I select that cell where the formula is located, go to the bottom right hand corner, get my fill handle. There it is. I click and drag down to F13. And there we go. Now I'm going to go to cell G2, where we have grand total. Now this is going to be a combination of the subtotal and the sales tax to give us a grand total. So this one's pretty simple. We're just adding the subtotal to the sales tax. Adding the subtotal to the sales tax. All right, now, in this case, we only have two data values that we're referencing, two cells that we're referencing, E2 and F2. Okay, but it is good to get the practice of using functions. So we're going to use a function here, and we'll use it again in a minute. So in this case, we want to add. So that's going to be the sum function. So let's just remind ourselves. Oftentimes when we're using a spreadsheet program like this, in some cases, we're referencing so many cells that a function makes things much faster. In other cases, we don't really know how to build the calculation from scratch. Okay, it could be very complex. So we just let the function do it for us. All right, so here in Google Sheets, your functions, you do have access to them in your toolbar. To the almost to the very right, there's that symbol here, the sigma symbol, just like it is in Excel. If I click on the drop-down, I'll see in the top here a few kind of basic or common functions that we use, but underneath are categories of all the functions available in Google Sheets here. All right, ranging from very simple to advanced. Okay, now we're just going to use a sum function, which is the function that will add values. So remember, when we use a function, we could either select the cells that we want to include in that function first and then select the function, or the opposite order. In this case, we're going to select the cells first. And let me look at something real quick so I don't confuse you. 1 second here. Okay, perfect. So let's select E2 and F2. Those are the two cells that we want to add in this case. Remember, you're not using the fill handle this time. We're not copying and pasting anything. We're just selecting the cells. So that's going to be the regular mouse pointer, E2 over to F2 like this. Now it's going to put, because we're going left to right, Google Sheets knows that it wants, it's going to put the formula and the answer in the cell to the right. So it will do that automatically. So it's going to put it in cell G2. So now that we've selected those cells, let's go and select our function. So we go up to that drop down and we select sum. It's going to show you the syntax. Let's press enter to run the formula, and there's our answer. Now I want to apply that formula to the other rows of data, so I select cell G2 where the formula is located. I go to the bottom right hand corner. This time I use the fill handle because we are in fact copying and pasting. I go down to cell G13, and there we go. All right, and we'll talk about that syntax in just 1 minute. I just want to do one more function first. All right, now we want to get one more piece of data here. We want a total of all sales. Total of all sales. So in other words, we want to add up all of our grand total values, G2 through G13, which will give us a total of all sales. So just to keep everything on one screen so you can see it better, we're going to put this right underneath. So the formula will go right down here in cell G14. Okay, it makes sense logically because we're adding up and down vertically. So we'll put the answer underneath. Or should I say we'll put the formula underneath and it will put the answer there. All right, excuse me. Now before I do that, I'm going to create a label for it. I want to create a label called total sales. So instead of putting the label all the way to the left over here in column A to identify that one, I'll just put the label right next to it here in cell F14. I'll call it total sales. All right, now let's do our function. So again, let's select the cells first and then we'll select the function. So it's going to be G2 through G13. So let me just scroll up a little bit. Remember, we're not using the fill handle, just your regular mouse pointer. I'm going to select G2 through G13. I'll go up to the function dropdown, select sum. I press enter to run the formula, and there's my answer, $1,754.21. Now I'm going to double click on that cell to just kind of review very quickly how that syntax works. I'll zoom in for a second. Okay. So before we were able to do something like equal C2 times D2 because it was very simple. But in this case, we used a function. So the syntax is a bit different. So we have equals sum, that's our function name. And then whenever you use a function, your cell range must be enclosed in parentheses. We didn't have to do this before because we weren't using a function. When you use a function, your cell range must be enclosed in parentheses like we see here, G2, G13. And remember, the colon indicates a range. So we start with our first cell, go to our last cell in the range, G2 to G13, and it will add up those two and everything in between. All right, so the reason we really used it here especially is because in this case without a function, I would have had to type out equals G2 plus G3 plus G4 plus G5, etc., which is way too time consuming and I might miss something. So when we use a function, we're able to just use a cell range, which is much easier and faster. Now, if you're inside the cell like this, like I am, looking at the syntax, be very careful. Don't type anything. Just press your enter key to exit the cell. I'm going to zoom back out a little bit here. I'll just keep it zoomed in and then I'll scroll down if I have to, just so you can see it better. That's good. All right. So now we have all that data entered. All right, our data entry is complete. Our formulas entry is complete. Let's format this to dress it up, make it look a little better, a little more presentable maybe. So the first thing I'd like to do, we have a lot of currency values here. So we want to actually format them for a currency. This is why I told you before, we don't have to worry about necessarily if you're entering currency values yourself, like we did with columns D and E, we didn't have to put in dollar signs. We could just let Excel do that for us. So, or I'm sorry, Google Sheets, excuse me. So Sheets, just like Excel, comes with a number of different number formatting options. So all we have to do is select the cells that we want to apply those options to and slap them on. So I'm going to select, remember, no fill handle, just your regular pointer. We're not selecting the actual values, the content, we're just selecting the cells. So I'm going to select D2 through G13 like this. And we would call this the D2 through G13 range, top left to bottom right. Don't worry about the total sales cell. We'll come to that in a second. All right, so D2 through G13 is selected. Now, as I showed you before, this is in your toolbar. Okay, you do have some options here. You can also use your format dropdown if you prefer. If you go to number, and you'll see a whole bunch of options here. All right, in this case though, I can click right on the dollar sign in the toolbar where it says format as currency, and it will default to US dollars. And as you can see, once I click on it, it does a few things. It rounds all of my decimal places to just 2. Many of them had 4. It also gives me a dollar sign. And also, look at cell G14. Even though it was not part of the selection, it still grabbed it. Okay, Google Sheets is pretty sophisticated, and it did that for me. It just basically assumed that that was going to be part of this as well. All right, and you'll see that that currency format also gives you a comma once you get into the thousands or above. All right, but let's say I wanted a different currency. In that case, I could go to the format. Actually, I think I could go, yeah, I can go to the 1, 2, 3 drop down here in the toolbar and scroll down to custom currency. If I wanted my date, if I wanted to format it for date and time, but have it look a specific way, I can go to custom date and time or do custom number format for a number of other options. Oops, there we go. All right, now the next thing I'd like to do is I want to give my data set a title. I want to give my spreadsheet a title. We did this in Excel. Now I don't want to put this title, if you're familiar with headers and footers, sometimes we use headers for titles. We put it into the top margin of the page. In this case though, I want to put the title, I want to put it in the actual spreadsheet. And I want it to be above the data set. So what that means is that once again, I need a new row 1 because that's the top row. So just like we did before, let's go ahead and insert a new row. So I'll select any cell from the current row 1 to target that insertion. I'll go up to the insert dropdown. I'll go to rows and select 1 row above. Now remember, by doing this, okay, by creating a new row 1, I at the same time change all of my cell references. So for example, in cell F3 here, previously this was equals 7% times E2. Now it's E3 because of that new row. So just like Excel, in Google Sheets, you can add new columns and rows after you've already input formulas without worrying about corrupting your data, okay? The program will just update your cell references accordingly. So no worries. So let's go back up to row 1 and let's do our title. Now, another problem we have is we want our title to be centered. All right, we want it to be centered here. but that's going to be impossible because I have a bunch of individual cells in the way. So if we want to center it about here, okay, I can't do that. But what I can do is merge cells together, which will essentially just create one giant cell without any divisions in between. So it works the same way it does in Excel, essentially. First I select the cells that I want to merge. So I'm going to select A1 through G1. Remember, just you're selecting the cells, you're not using the fill handle. A1 through G1 like this. Now I merge them. This is right here in our toolbar where we have the borders tool, for example, and fill color. So think of these as tools to kind of quickly format the cells themselves. Okay, so we have merge right here. If you just click right on the icon itself, you'll merge those cells together. Now, I also want to center my cursor. In Excel, it does merge and center together. Here in Sheets, we have to do it as two separate steps. No big deal. So I merge the cells together. Now, with that cell selected, I'll just go back up to my toolbar, go to right next door to the right, where we have horizontal align, click on the drop-down and select center. Now, if I double click into that cell, my cursor is centered, and I'll type in my title, classic Broadway musical soundtracks. You could just call it, whatever you want, Broadway musical soundtracks. You could just call it Broadway soundtracks. I'm just going to call it classic Broadway musical soundtracks. And I'll just press the enter key just to exit that cell and save that in there. Now let's format that title a little bit. I want to just make it pop a little more. So I'll select it again, select the title cell. All right, maybe I'll increase the font size a little bit. I'll make it, how about 14? Now remember, when we use this, just like Excel, we don't have to select the text like we would in something like Microsoft Word. If you select that cell, like so, and you change your font size or your font or something along those lines, it will just apply to everything inside the cell universally. Okay, so I've selected that cell. I'll go up to my font tools where it says 10. You can either click on the drop down and select the size from this list here, or type right into the box. It's really up to you. I'll select 14, and there it is. Now I want to do a little more. I want to fill in this cell with a color. So we go back to the cell tools, fill color here, and I'll select a color from this palette. And if you want to change the font, I'll go back over to the font choices. Remember that cell is still selected. And I'll use this one called Caveat. Now, another thing that I like to do myself is I like to format my labels, okay? So I'm talking about A2 through G2. So we're on row 2 right now. And as I always say, Excel or Google Sheets, either case, labels are very important, not just for identifying values and making sense of values, but the programs themselves will recognize labels. Okay, so I like to just format them in a special way to offset them from the rest of my values, just so so if somebody's looking at this, they can quickly see that these are labels and not unique data values. So I'll select A2 through G2. Remember, I'm not using the fill handle, just the regular select cursor. And I'll do 3 things. I'll go up to the toolbar. I'm going to select B for bold. I'm going to go over to the right, back to that fill color, and this time do a different color. And then I'm going to go back to the alignment group, where we have horizontal alignment, and select center. Okay, and last but not least, remember we have another label down here in cell F15. So we want to format it the same way as the other labels. Okay, Google Apps, just like Microsoft Office, these apps do contain the Format Painter tool. So up there in the toolbar to the left, there's that paint roller. In Office, it's a paintbrush. In Google, it's a paint roller. Okay, but it is the same tool. Remember, this will copy and paste formatting. So instead of copying and pasting the actual content, it copies and pastes formatting options. So if I want to make cell F15 down here, bold font, a blue fill color like this, and center alignment, I could just select one of the cells that contains those options, like B2 here, and then click on the paint format icon, and then scroll down and click on cell F15, and it will quote unquote paint those options onto that cell. All right, and remember, if you, I believe, actually, does Google do a double click? Let me make sure I'm not lying to you before I, no, it does not. Okay, Office supports multiple paints, where when you double click on the icon, it will stay on, so you can keep clicking, and then you can turn it off when you're done. In this case with Google, we just have to do it one at a time. All right, so let's talk about a couple more things here. I want to talk about notes. All right, so we'll just pretend that for now this is done. Okay, everything is set. Now in your insert dropdown, okay, down below, you have a tool called comment and a tool called note. All right, it gets a little bit confusing because Office, depending on the version of Office you're using, you'll find similar tools, but they might work differently. So here in Google Sheets, if I want to just leave a little note for my reference or for somebody else's reference, just something that I want them to see to maybe clarify a data value, okay, that would be a note. Comments are meant for collaboration. So when you share this sheet with other people, you would use comments to to leave comments, right? So when you leave a comment, it has your name, when you left the comment, all right, so people can see what it is you're commenting on. But a note is really meant just kind of for reference to clarify a data value. All right, so for example, if I go to cell C5 here where there's a 0, maybe if I'm the supervisor, I'm looking this over, I might be a little bit concerned. We didn't sell any of this title last year, or at least in the month it was promoted. We didn't sell any. And I'm looking, and actually it was the most expensive one sold. So maybe that's why it didn't sell. So I want to tell whoever gave this to me, my colleague, I want to tell them to discount the price next year. Maybe we'll sell it if we do that. So I'm going to leave a note on this cell. So I've selected cell C5, that's step 1. You select the cell upon which you want to leave a note. Now I'll go up to the insert dropdown and go down to note. I get a little note box, it says type here, and I'll just type right over it with discount, price next year. All right, and remember, you can resize that box if you want to. In the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see those 2 little lines. If you point at them, you'll get a 2-way arrow like this. And if you click and drag, diagonally, you can resize it just to save on space if you want to. But you really don't have to necessarily, because when you click outside the cell, the comment, or excuse me, the note hides automatically. However, it does leave a little triangle in the cell, which lets you know that there is a note there. So if you don't have to click on the cell, if you just point at it, the note will pop up again, so you can read it, just like it does in Excel. The only difference is that in Excel, we get a red triangle instead of a black one. Okay. Also, though, Excel allows us to show all comments. So if I don't want it to hide automatically, I want it to always show on the screen, I could show it. Okay, but in this case, it does hide automatically. All right. And there's a way to view comments or show comments, but not notes, unfortunately. Now, I could show you a way to print out your notes along with your spreadsheet. We will come to that in a little bit. All right. Now, remember, these are notes. Okay, they're basically just built into the spreadsheet itself, and they're just kind of meant for reference or for clarification. When you are collaborating with people, however, you'll be using comments, which look much different, as you can see. They're attached to a cell, just like a note is, but you have your Google account name there. Okay, and you can leave comments and even reference people with the @ symbol. All right, now in Microsoft Excel, remember, when you're using the desktop version or the installed version, in other words, when you're not using a Microsoft 365 subscription, if it's installed in your computer, notes are called comments in Excel. Same thing, but they're called comments. Same function as notes in Sheets. However, when you use Microsoft 365 subscription, the subscription, okay, that does support notes and comments. So it could be a bit confusing, but here in Google Sheets, notes are for reference and clarification, comments are for collaboration. Last but not least, one more thing I want to show you before we go to print is freezing panes. We did this in Excel too. I'll show you how to do it here in Google Sheets because it is a very useful tool. All right, so a problem we often have, let me just, I'm going to zoom in very closely to simulate this. So a problem we often have, whether we're zoomed in very closely or maybe we just have a lot of data, is that when we scroll down, okay, if I look at 1099 here in cell D9, I don't know what that is because I lost my column label. I have to constantly scroll up and down to see what it is, which can be annoying, right? Similarly, if I scroll to the right, that same 1099, I lost track of the title it's associated with, the soundtrack title. So I lost that information. So Sheets, just like Excel, allows us to freeze specific columns and or rows so they're always in our view. Remember, this doesn't necessarily have any effect on the printed copy, just the way we see it on the screen. So we don't have to keep scrolling to make sense of data. All right, so your freeze tool is, I'm sorry, it's in your view dropdown. I knew that. I don't know why for a brief moment I forgot, but it's in your view dropdown, just like it's in the view tab in Excel. And you'll see freeze right here. Now I want to go over the options first before we actually do the freeze. So let's use rows, for example. It says 1 row, 2 rows up to row 1. Okay. So 1 row or 2 rows, this is assuming that these will refer to column labels. Because remember, column labels are set up in rows. So like row 2 here, these are column labels because they're identifying what's underneath of them in columns, but they're set up in a row. So this would be freezing a row. So let's go back real quick. So 1 row assumes that that my labels are in row 1. 2 rows assumes that I want to freeze rows 1 and 2, like we do right now. Otherwise, I can also target a specific row by selecting any cell from that row. So if I want to freeze row 5, I can select cell B5, go to freeze, and it will say up to row 5. Okay, and then it's the same thing with columns. One column, which would be column A, two columns, which would be A and B, or up to whatever column you select. So it works a little bit differently than it does in Excel. It's actually a bit more intuitive than it is in Excel, because Excel you have to go to the left or above. I don't want to give you too much information to confuse you. Here in Excel, or here in Sheets, we really just have to target it by selecting the column or row, or just using the 1 or 2 default options. So really in this case, we could use either option. We could either target the rows and columns we need by selecting, or we could really just go to View, Freeze, 2 rows, and then View, Freeze, 2 columns. Now, this is a unique problem to Sheets that we do not see in Excel. When you have a merged cell, like we do with our title, okay, and you go to freeze columns, all right, if a merged cell is taking up part of those 2 columns like it is right now, it's not going to work, okay? So to get around this, what can we do? Remember that many of these tools, just like in Office, they're essentially on and off switches. So I could just remove the merge for now and then just add it back later. So if I select my title cell, go up to my toolbar, notice how the merge tool is shaded in? That means it's turned on. Just click on it again to turn it off. Now I can go ahead to the View menu, go to Freeze, 2 columns, and now it will work. So now if I scroll down, I don't lose track of my row column labels. And if I scroll to the right, I don't lose track of my row labels, which in this case are the CD titles. All right, now to unfreeze, I simply go back up to the View dropdown, go to Freeze, select no rows and then no columns. And then I'm gonna merge that titles, the cells A1 through G1 again. So let me just zoom back out. There we go. And I'm gonna select A1 through G1 and just merge them again. Now, I did talk about a couple of things real quick, and we'll very quickly go through print options. All right. Resizing columns and rows and sheets works the same way as Excel. We didn't really run into that problem here, but let's just pretend we did very quickly. I'll go to cell H2 and give this a label. I'm just going to type in something. Okay, don't worry about it. Just for a quick example. Location. Here, how about this? Shelf location of item. Perfect. So a problem we often have with Excel and Sheets is that column widths left to right, they're too narrow to accommodate a data value or maybe multiple data values. And you'll know because as you type, as you can see, the outline now goes into column I, okay, because it's just too wide for column H. Now it's not in column I, that value is still in cell H2 and in H2 only. In fact, if I press enter, all right, it looks like it's going to column H, but it's not. Okay, it's only in cell H2. It looks like it's going into column I. I think I said that correctly, but it's only in cell H2. So we can resize columns and rows. The fastest way to do it is using your auto fit. All right, make sure you exit the cell first. Don't be inside the cell. Exit it. Go up between your column letters. In this case, H and I, you get your two-way arrow. And notice where that blue line is. When when I double click, it's going to resize the column to the left of the two-way arrow, and that blue line will remind you of that. So if I double click, there's my auto fit. And auto fit can go wider, it can also go more narrow. It conforms to your longest data value in that column. So you're not wasting space and you're not short on space. That's an auto fit. Remember, you can click and drag and make them whatever sizes you want, but the auto fit makes it just the right amount of space, which is especially important for printing. So you're not wasting unnecessary space. And you can do the same thing with row heights. Just go between the numbers on the left and you'll get a vertical arrow. In this case, it would affect the row above that two-way arrow. Okay, and that would adjust the row height. A problem we don't see too often, not as often as column widths. Okay, but it does happen, especially if you have multiple lines in a cell. But just to show you that you can adjust row heights as well. Let me just get rid of that before I forget. I'll just undo a few times. Oops, there we go. Okay, and I did want to make sure, let's talk about printing first. Now, I did cover sharing in Google Drive 2 weeks ago. All right, so I won't cover it here, but remember, if you want to share this, your share button's up there in the top right. Watch that Google Drive video, and it will show you step by step how to share a specific file with both Google and non-Google users. Whether you want them to just view it, you want them to be able to leave comments, or you want them to be able to edit it entirely, much like you can. Okay, all that's covered in the Google Drive video. Excuse me. All right, so let's go to let's click on the print icon here in our toolbar, and you'll see that with comment, or I keep saying comments. See, with notes, it will print out your notes on a separate page. Excel does this too. It gives you this option. So it will essentially give them to you with footnotes. And those footnotes are going to be found in your spreadsheet. So there's a 1 there. It might be hard to see, but there is a 1 next to that note. And if I go up to my spreadsheet, okay, there's a 1 in that cell. So it's just a reference, right? So I just go down to that footnote on the other page, and I can see the note there. Okay, now in your print menu here, we could do a lot of the same things you could do with Excel in terms of formatting this for printing. All right, so on the right side, you can use landscape or portrait orientation. Landscape tends to work better for spreadsheets. You can adjust the scale under scale here. You can change your margin sizes under margins. You can set custom page breaks, which is something that it's a little tricky, but essentially you can decide where you want one page to start and end. So maybe you want a specific column to go on the next page, something like that. You can set those page breaks. Under formatting, here we go. Show grid lines, show notes. So if you want to show your notes, make sure this is checked off. Otherwise, it will not print them. Same thing with grid lines. I personally like to have the grid lines printed. If you don't, you can turn it off, and you won't get the lines between each cell on your page, like you see here. I'm going to add them back. Page order, that's typically something we don't change. Okay, alignment, if you want your spreadsheet to be centered perfectly on the page, not in the top left, you can change it to horizontal center and vertical center. So it looks like that, centered on the page. And then you can go to headers and footers, and if you want to give your page a header and or a footer, remember we typically use headers and footers for identifying information, such as our name, like the author, the date in which the file was created, and maybe a page number. So I could just click right on page numbers, and it puts it as a default in the bottom right corner of my footer. But if you want to do it yourself, you can go to edit custom fields and basically assemble your headers and footers however you want. You'll see it gives you 3 sections. For your header, left, center, and right. For maybe a name, a project name, and then a date here. And then 3 sections in your footer. Again, usually I just put a page number on my footer, and I usually put it in the center, but you could put it in whatever section you like. I just want to see real quick. Yeah, if you click into the sections, you'll get a little toolbar like this. So you can just insert a page number. You can insert a date, a time, or the title of your workbook or the sheet. Or you can type in whatever you want. Okay, and last but not least is the row and column headers option. Okay, I covered this in Excel a little bit. So similar to freezing rows and columns on your screen, you can also have specific rows and columns repeat on printed pages. Okay, this is another problem we often have with Sheets and Excel. When you have a lot of data and you go to print, for example, let's say September through December here ends up on page 2 just because of how much data is there. We're just using an example. So now I'm losing my column labels because they're on page 1. Okay, so it's like a similar problem we had before, but on paper, not on the screen. So similarly, I can repeat specific rows and repeat specific columns, so they print on every page. I don't lose track of my labels. And what I like about Google Sheets is that it actually goes by the rows and columns you freeze. So you would actually, in step 1, go to your view menu, go to freeze the rows and columns that you want to have repeated on your pages that print out, and then go to rows and column headers, and then just check off both boxes. So again, step 1 would be freeze. That's why they're disabled right now, because nothing's frozen. And then come back to your print dialog box here. And if you want to repeat them on the printed copy, check off both boxes. All right, and I just want to show you one last really quick thing, and then we're all set with Google Sheets here. Oh, and I believe, I should have mentioned too that I believe Google Sheets, yes, when you go to next here, what Google Sheets actually does, it doesn't print directly, it downloads it as a PDF to your computer. If you look in the bottom left of my computer here, there's a PDF that just downloaded. So I would open that, and then the PDF I would print if I needed to print it. Okay. So again, Google Sheets will download as a PDF, and then you print the PDF. And remember, you can always go to File and download it as a different file type. So if I wanted to convert this to an Excel workbook, so I could save it on my computer and open it up as an Excel in Excel, I would go to File, Download, Microsoft Excel. I could also download it directly as a PDF, similarly to what we just saw with the print menu. And there are other file types you could explore as well. And if you want to revert to a prior version of this file, down here is version history, also in your file menu. I'll click on See Version History very quickly. Okay, on the right side, you have this navigation pane. And you'll see the most recent version and the original underneath, what it started out as at the very beginning, which was a blank spreadsheet just like this. And if you click on the arrow here next to the current version, it will expand to show all the versions in between. So every step you took in creating this spreadsheet is essentially saved as its own version. And it's being a little slow, I apologize. Let's just try refreshing real quick. All right, there we go. Okay, so it's showing me on the left what that version looked like, and on the right, everything is time-stamped. Okay. And if you click on the three dots menu there, you'll see restore this version. But just to be safe that you don't accidentally overwrite the current version, okay, you can always make a copy. That's what I would do. So for example, I wanted it to go back to one of these earlier versions. I would make a copy of that version so it's a separate file. So I have my current version still intact, and then the older version potentially as a separate file because I clicked make a copy first. All right, and that's your version history here in Google Sheets. Again, Google Docs, Slides, they have the same tool. All right, and just one more thing. Remember that if you open up an Excel workbook in Sheets, which I'll do right now real quick. All right, I could edit this directly if I want to. I could, but remember, I know that this is Excel because in the file name, it does indicate the Excel file format here. So just to be safer, what I could do is go to File, Save as Google Sheets, just to make sure it's all the formatting is going to be the same once I start editing it in Sheets. All right, now at this time, if you have any further questions about what we covered in Google Sheets tonight, I encourage you to use the GoToMeeting chat feature. Click on the chat bubble in the GoToMeeting window, type in your question, then hit send. All right, in the meantime, I'll go through just a few very brief closing remarks, and then we'll be all set for the night here. All right, so thank you for coming to Google Sheets tonight. Remember that this class was recorded. It will be available on our library's YouTube channel on our computer instruction playlist. So if you want to get to this recording or that Google Drive recording I kept referring to, it's in the same playlist. So go to mcl.org, our library website, click on the YouTube icon in the upper left of the homepage. That will then take you to our YouTube channel. Once you're there, go to playlists and then select the computer instruction playlist. And as I always like to remind you, while you're on that YouTube channel, be sure to check out our other playlists because we have a lot of other great library programs that are recorded and available in other playlists. Oops, let me skip past that, sorry. All right, now remember, if you want to sign up for more classes, you could do this through our website. You can either go to mcl.org and just go to the main events menu and go to our event calendar, or you can go to mcl.org and go to services and then go to technology instruction. And from there, you can go to the register button and register for whatever computer classes interest you. And the March classes will be there. They are posted and they'll be available for registration this Friday. They'll open up on this Friday. And if you need to retake Google Sheets next month, you could always retake classes as many times as needed. And remember, we're also offering those virtual private sessions on select Fridays in March. All right, these are virtual only. During these sessions, we work with just you individually on a computer project you might need some help with. Or in some cases, we can help troubleshoot problems with your tech device. All right, so again, they're on select Fridays, virtual only, between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. You'll find them in the same computer class calendar. Just click on the link and then follow the instructions to book your session. If you have any other questions about our technology instruction program, about classes, registration, anything along those lines, anything at all, you can always send us an email to techclass@mcl.org. All right, at this time, if you have no further questions, you can click on the X in the upper right-hand corner of the GoToMeeting window and then select Leave Meeting. If you are leaving us, thanks so much for coming tonight. We hope to see you again in class very soon. Take care, everyone.